Biogeography, Chapter 4, The Geography of Life. As of 2014, there was an estimate of 443 islands in the entire Earth that each span at least 970 square miles or greater. A lot of these islands contain an array of species that are endemic or restricted to a geographic region. For example, the Juan Fernandez Islands are notable for its 5-inch rust-brown hummingbird, found nowhere else in the world, which is just as notable for its lack of amphibians, reptiles, and mammals of that island. This is quite unusual because amphibians, reptiles, or mammals are common in continents all over the world. So why is it that this is such a common pattern on many oceanic islands? The accumulation of questions like this is what Charles Darwin wanted to understand through his trips to the Galapagos Islands, and countless years of research in support of his theory of natural selection. He proposed that the distribution of species was ultimately explained by evolution. This large dispersal of species, along with their evolution into new species and shifts in the ancient Earth's land masses, are what brought about Darwin's explanation of the geography of life in the origin of species. Since Darwin's intellectual inquiries, technology has improved in the further understanding of biogeography. Scientists have uncovered great amounts of information on species divergence. We are now able to know the evolutionary relationship between species, along with the time in which they converge from common ancestry. This especially helps in predicting the divergence times from organisms with poor fossil records. Even in the last 57 years, we've also known that the geography of the Earth was in the form of a supercontinent that has since vastly shifted. To further explain the importance of geography of life, we will look at relationships between animal and plant distributions on continents and oceanic islands, along with convergent evolution factors of some species. This overall can help us understand the patterns and questions with possible answers that give evidence to evolution.
Oceanic islands versus continental islands. Oceanic islands are islands that have never been connected to a main piece of land and that have risen from the seafloor. Some examples of these islands are the Galapagos Archipelago Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, and the St. Helena Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. So what's the deal with these oceanic islands anyways? The special thing about these oceanic islands is that they are really isolated. So this means they only carry a certain amount of species, mainly neglecting freshwater fish, amphibians, and reptiles. On a bigger scale, what this really means is that only exclusive amounts of species are found on these pieces of land that are not seen around the world. These species are known to be called endemic. A great example of these are the Galapagos finches. They are only native to the Galapagos Islands. This isolation, the species themselves have also evolved into specialized finches. For example, the woodpecker finches are used to break open hard cases and maybe break into like a cactus skin, something like that. So their beaks would tend to be a little more on the thicker side because it needs to be rough and big in order to break these cases. There's another type of finch called the vampire finch, where it is able to latch onto its victim where it has a wound and is able to suck out the blood. Now this type of finch beak would be sort of skinnier and more narrow, so it's able to get that beak inside of its victim. With this diversity of animal subspecies, oceanic islands are said to be imbalanced according to Coyne. Continental islands are islands that have been connected to a piece of land at some point in time, but was then separated either by a rise in the ocean sea levels or the shifting of continental plates. Continental islands are islands that have been connected to a supercontinent of some sort at some point in time, but was then separated either by a rise in ocean sea levels or the shifting of continental plates. Continental islands show an example of evolution because the species that are on these pieces of land are derivatives of species from the mainland. Before the connecting land was submerged, these species must have already migrated to the area, and then the rising sea levels or continental shift of the plates occurred. This then creates a subpopulation of species from the main population. This is also a really great example of genetic drift, and where a subpopulation is created because the result of a random event has occurred. A good example of this are placentals that are seen throughout North and South America, and to the marsupials that are only seen in Australia. One example of similarity between these two organisms is that they both have similar reproductive systems.
Land bridges are pathways that bridge the gap between two different land masses, thus the name land bridge. Over time, however, due to continental drift, they have become submerged underwater. Though they are not commonly found in today's society, evidence of land bridges can still be seen. The most famous example of this evidence is the Bering Strait, which connects Alaska to Russia. It spans approximately 200 kilometers in width. This concept of land bridges further supports the idea that millions of years ago, all the continents were joined together to form a single supercontinent. Today, we call this supercontinent Pangaea. Over time, the landmass would eventually separate into two other supercontinents called Laurasia and Gondwana, which would later go on to separate into the landmasses we have today. This separation not only divided the landmasses, but also divided the animal population. As a result, this had an undeterminable effect in species individually, which created unpredictable consequences for the population as to its viability. During this process, two types of evolution emerged: divergent and convergent. Stranded in their new environments, the animals had to adapt to survive, which led to the rise of new species. This accrual of differences between these species is known to evolutionary biologists as divergent evolution. This can be readily seen by once again examining the Galapagos finches. Though they originate from a common ancestor, environmental factors have caused them to evolve in different ways to a point in which interbreeding is now impossible. The Geospias magnirostrasus evolved to have a large, thick beak to crack open nuts that were the abundant food source in its environment, whereas the Certhidea olivacea have small slender beaks to be used to dig for insects which were abundant in their environment. Convergent evolution is where two different species have evolved to adapt to each of their own environments in similar fashions. This concept can be seen through the comparison of placental mammals and Australian marsupials. Two different species that implemented the same solution to environmental obstacles as one another, such as the ability to glide in the flying squirrel and flying phalanger to help them scavenge the distance between trees for food, as well as the cat-like structure of the ocelot and Tasmanian tiger cat to have the agile reflexes to outmaneuver predators. These similarities allow evolutionary biologists to postulate that these species have needed to adapt to their environment to survive in their similar environments.
The phylogenetic tree. Just to briefly go over this because I feel it bears a great relationship between why species of animals on oceanic and continental islands have similarities between the animals that are on the closest mainland. So what is a phylogenetic tree? The phylogenetic tree tells us where in the organism's lineage does it diverge or converge with other species. There's this term called synapomorphy, which means two animals that share a similar trait from a common ancestor. So basically, in the past, there's these primitive forms of these modern organisms that we see now today. And through time, they've evolved, losing or obtaining traits. The phylogenetic tree will be able to show exactly where and between which time frame where the organism evolved.
So, in conclusion, Darwin was right in his theory of evolution. According to Coyne and his reflection of the geography of life, the main lessons of biogeography is that only evolution can explain the diversity of life on continents and islands, as well as the fact that the distribution of life on Earth reflects a blend of chance and lawfulness. Through the study of past patterns, we can postulate how future species, as well as land masses, will exist, which greatly affects us as humans.